We're going to keep going with this idea of parapsychology and controlled offensive behavior. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is being able to manipulate someone else's behavior. And this has been a study of governments and others for a number of decades. And there's some very good information that we're going to look at tonight that sort of illustrates with some detail exactly what I'm talking about. Things like manipulating your consciousness, your brain, and your nervous system with light, with sound, and electromagnetic energy, as well as aggressive forms of hypnosis. So stay tuned, and we are going to take our time going through these topics before we start looking at antennas that are all around us today. So it's very important that we cover this information so you understand, to have some context as it relates to the potential of what is being done, could be done, what may be done, et cetera, et cetera. So you're watching Big Tech. We are on episode 79. If you go to PatriotSoapbox.com, you'll be able to find the archive notes. They are underneath the section Read, Watch, Think for Yourself. Like I said, we are on episode 79. And we are going to continue our read of the unconventional research in the USSR and Russia as it relates to parapsychology and psychotronics. And we're going to look at a CIA reading room with the keyword search of telepathy. Briefly look at that. There's a plethora of reading there. And then we're going to start looking at controlled offensive behavior. And we'll likely continue the review of controlled offensive behavior on the next upcoming show as well. So with that said, kind of a recap from the last time we were here, right? Soviet Union, 1 billion psychotronic arms race with the US. This was published in 2013. And the document that we were reading, this is a better view of what I just said. The document we were reading was posted on Cornell, their website, if you will. It's elsewhere, but this is what showed up on a cursory search. And it's unconventional research in USSR and Russia, a short overview. And this is going through the timeline, basically 1800, late 1800s, early 1900s, all the way up to and through the 90s. So we left off on page 12, I believe. And we're gonna review a few paragraphs back just to kind of set the table. And we are, I believe, right about here. This is page 12. All right, so from 1980 to 2003. So keep in mind, right, the Soviets, as well as the United States, early 1900s, through World War I, World War II, up to and including, right, last decade, basically, and ongoing now, in my view, have been looking at this idea of understanding the energy, the bioenergy that is emitted from a human or an animal or a plant, being able to quantify it, being able to capture it, being able to synthesize it, being able to transmit it, and therefore use it for things like telepathy and or other forms of manipulation / communication with biological organisms. So we're going to start with section 6 here from 1980 to 2003. We're going to finish through this document, and we are going to look at the nitty gritty, or a little more of the nitty gritty as it relates to being able to manipulate a human. So works of the 80s and the early 90s are primarily characterized by an appearance of centralized strategic programs at the level of the State Committee for Science and Technology at the Council of Ministers. The role of the SCST USSR was to determine the main direction of the development of science and technology, planning and organization of major developments of national importance for scientific and technical problems. The organization, introduction into production of discoveries, inventions, and the results of exploratory research, for example, nuclear power. So what they're discussing here is this central committee in the USSR that's responsible for steering and directing what is researched and how much money is being applied to different areas of research as it relates to science and technology. This is a centralized command, top-down control structure, which differs from the United States at this time. So thus, the strategic role of some unconventional areas, including instrumental psychotronics, was recognized. These works also received a significant amount of funding. Selection of 1980, early 80s, as the last period in the development of unconventional research is motivated by the following reasons. Just note here that they're saying that this was the last period of development of unconventional research. And I personally disagree with this a great deal. This idea of unconventional research is the future of warfare. Why would you stop ongoing research as it relates to the future of warfare? The future battle space being this fusion of cyber and science and biology and technology to create this fusion that results in a platform by which remote distance manipulations can be performed using telecommunication infrastructure, amongst other types of infrastructure. You can use the power lines as well. You couple that in with the advances in science, and you're able to do things like manipulate the water, the food supply, the medicine, and everything else to begin to deliver binary weapon systems that then fuse together and create an overarching structure by which modern warfare can commence. Unconventional research. Science, technology, biology, medicine, all fused together. That's what the modern battle space is at this point. So here we go. First, the instrumental generators of the mid-70s have improved, and the first experimental results of their work are obtained in the 80s, as shown in Figure 8. For generators of Stokowski, most of these works with this generator were made in Kiev. In general, Kiev during this period was one of the main centers of instrumental psychotronics. V.A. Sokolova describes experiments that were carried out in 1984 to 1987, which are supervised by the USRR's Ministry of Health and Ministry of Agriculture. And if you remember, we looked at this table. We'll look at it briefly to continue to set the table, no pun intended, for those that missed the last show. And what they're looking at here are experiments that relate to this idea of applying energy, right, to these different human components. So impact on human blood out of the body, impact on drought and frost resisting of plants, impact on the nucleus level, impact on plant germination, impact on drinking water, impact on plant photosynthesis, impact on plant characteristics, investigation of impact of nature, comparative analysis of human and device impact, impact on snail neurons, impact on bioinformational taxis, impact on animal resistance to ionizing radiation. This was at the Space Medicine Research Institute in Moscow. Impact on blood, another study on that out of the body. And what this is a survey of experiments conducted with the generator, SERPAN, from 1981 to 1990. This is a psychotronic generator. So this idea of being able to generate bioenergy or something synthetic like bioenergy, and then studying how specific energy waveforms, resonances, etc., impact biological organisms, whether they be human, animal, plant, doesn't matter. So, quote out of this period from the basically the Department of Agriculture, Defense, and Science, right? Works with torsion generators are mainly performed on the basis of biophysical laboratory of the Patrice Lumumba's University in the period from 1984 to 1987. In addition, our torsion generators have been tested in Moscow's leading institutions: the Institute of Virology of Academy of Medical Sciences, Institute of Bioengineering at the Gamal's Institute, Pharmacological Institute, NPO of Volna, NPO of Engineering, Institute of Crystallography, etc. Moreover, our team and generators are tested in a production environment in some farms of the Moscow area: cattle farm, Kamenka in Polsk district, plant growing on state farms, and the farm Taraskovka Tarovsky in the Pushkin area. With us at the farm, Istra worked. As part of these experiments, various virological, biological, medical, and agricultural works were carried out. The object of these experiments were microorganisms, mice, plants, and even medical works with patients. That would be humans. According to Sokolova, already in 1986, more than 30 torsion generators were produced. Positronic experimentation on biology is what we're looking at here. Second, due to the contacts between authorities and psychics, it is assumed there existed contacts between Juna and Brezhnev. Various research institutes received official orders to explore these phenomena. In 1980, the SCST and the Presidium of the USSR's Academy of Sciences commissioned the Institute of Radio Engineering and Electronics, AS-USSR, the lead agency of the Academy of Sciences, to study weak signals, the program of studying physical fields from biological objects in order to create fundamentally new methods of medical diagnostics. Interesting, huh? New methods to understand what's going on in the medical industry using radio and electronics. Academy of Sciences commissioned the Institute of Radio Engineering and Electronics to start looking at innovative ways to understand medicine and medical diagnostics. In particular, it included a study of physical fields from E.Y. Davitalishvili. These works were carried out under supervision of U.V. Gulev and E. Godik. The name of Y.V. Gulev is closely linked with other two names, Kobazarev and Kuligina. The groups of academics, Gulev and Kobazarev, investigated the phenomena of Kuligina, which has been studied since 1977 in the St. Petersburg Institute of Fine Mechanics and Optics, where we meet the name of Dulnev. These works stimulated the development of a psychic line of Soviet parapsychology. Third, in the 70s and 80s, the United States had a number of programs in the fields of applied parapsychology and psychotronics. The first declassified in 1995, and therefore the most well-known state program of studying PSI phenomena is the program on clairvoyance, non-local perception. Experts believe that there are actually a few independent programs in the CIA, counterintelligence, naval, and air forces. Two of them are the most famous. The first one was held on the CIA initiative since the early 1970s and since 1989 in SRI International, formerly known as Stanford Research Institute, and then from 1992 to 1994 at SAIC, Science Applications International Corporation, and later known as Anomalous Mental Phenomena. The second program, known by various names as Stargate, was conducted under the auspices of counterintelligence. There are different opinions about these programs. Although the CIA declassified 80,000 pages of text. In Russia, there are several books on this subject, such as the work of J.M. Monigla, Secrets of Remote Viewing. It is obvious that the USA and USSR competed in this area. Research on the one side stimulated equivalent studies on the other. Some representatives of power structures in the Soviet Union are characterized in the 80s. In general, in 80s, in this country, it was created a system of well-organized and conspiratorial works to develop new methods and means of resolving interstate and internal political problems without involving intimidating power forces and damaging effects. It included methods of obtaining timely information other than traditionally known. It's very interesting to read that quote because it sort of elaborates at new innovative ways to obtain intelligence and or to apply force. And so this idea, right, unconventional warfare, using technology, medicine, science, and the internet, is how do you apply kinetic action as warfare and not need to deploy a physical army? What does kinetic action look like using these types of technologies? And I'd like you to keep that as a frame of reference as we move forward. How do you propagate? How do you create, impose kinetic action, a physical action virtually over the internet? How do you manipulate people over the internet, considering it unconventional kinetic warfare? The easiest way to understand that in a loose sense, if you will, is this idea of propaganda, whereby you radicalize a population or a group or a person, and in turn are able to predict or steer the outcome of events based on actions that they are likely to take because of the propaganda. And it's much more sophisticated than that when we look at unconventional kinetic applications, when we start looking at using directed energy systems, whether it be light, sound, electromagnetic fields, to manipulate the nervous system and induce things like controlled hallucinations, controlled hypnotism, et cetera, reinforcement of neural networks that are superimposed on top of radicalized ideology. So that's where we're going with this discussion. Since the mid-1980s, the Central Coordinator of Unconventional Research became the State Committee for Science and Technology at the Council of Ministers, with the direct participation of the Ministry of Defense and the KGB. In the middle of 1986, Rishkov, on a memo about the perspectives of torsion technologies, wrote a resolution: take steps to organize the works. Many authors point to the classified document by the Central Committee of the CPSU and the USSR Council of Ministers of 27 January 1986 about the program, Management of Living Objects, including Human. For obvious reasons, the text of this resolution is not in the public domain, but this document has several indirect evidences. In May 1991, the Committee on Science and Technology at the Supreme Council of the USSR received a document from the member of the USSR Academy of Sciences, Alexandrov, which states, from the mid-'80s, the defense agencies and KGB funded disjointed pseudoscientific closed developments related to the problems of communication, weapons, and drug-free impact on human. In 1986, different groups were consolidated. They have entered into a document of CM, Council of Ministries. It is clear that Alexandrov is referring to the above-mentioned decree of the Council of Ministers of the USSR from 1986. The instrumental Psychotronics became a part of open programs on 22 December 1989. Decree N724 formed a center of unconventional technologies that should deal exclusively with instrumental psychotronics. See Figure 9. Akimov became the head of the center from 1989 to 1991. These studies were open and coordinated by the center. The unconventional works of the late 1980s, early 1990s are mainly associated with this organization. In 1991, there appeared the well-known conflict between the center and some representatives of the USSR's Academy of Sciences. On 26 June 1991, the SCST USSR created the Interdisciplinary Center of Unconventional Technologies, VENT, which received all the functions, including financial ones for coordinating the program. However, a week later, on 4 July 1991, the same SCST USSR issued the resolution about vicious practice of financing, where it blamed the performed unconventional research and the center. This is the oddest fact, where the same state organization within a very short period of time issued two distinctly different decrees, which had dramatic consequences for the whole country. As it is repeatedly stressed in this work, the Russian unconventional research is characterized by a strong antagonistic position of supporters and opponents of this research. Even the same state agencies, as stated by Akimov, this program should be about, whoa, looks like we have an image embed here, 500 million rubles. It seems that several organizations claimed the coordinating role at the end of the 80s, including the Academy of Science, which traditionally dealt with these issues. So let's look at this. It's all in Russian. Let's see what this says. Annex to the resolution of the SCST USSR N724 from, looks like December 22nd, 1989, on the establishment of a Center of Unconventional Technologies at the State Committee for Science and Technology, USSR. So in 1989, basically in 1990, they took all of these just disjointed programs throughout the USSR and converged them under a single ministry, and then began to provide targeted funding, taking many of these independent research groups, if you will, they're still nationalized, right? But then sort of fusing them together to really refine this idea of unconventional technology is what I'm understanding from what we just read. According to the statement of Bobrow, published in, looks like citation 97, the center vent in different forms existed until 2005. This is not that long ago, folks, with funding and active works up to the end of the 90s. According to publications, the work of the center has lasted at least until 1995. More recent publications are related to the International Institute of Theoretical and Applied Physics. Interesting. Now, what in the United States would be using or working on theoretical and applied physics? What groups out there? What institutions out there? I can think of organizations like all the national laboratories, like Department of Energy, right? Applied physics, that kind of stuff. And they also work with torsion fields and toroids. And if you don't subscribe to national laboratories, if you guys go on Twitter, you should. You may not understand everything that they publish, but you should, because they dish out pieces of information that they're claiming are breakthrough or innovations, et cetera. And it's really remarkable what they're telling us that they're working on. And my mind naturally gravitates to, if this is what they're talking about on platforms like Twitter, what are they really working on? And alternative energy is talked about there, quantum computation's talked about there, advanced photonics, nanotechnology, the whole nano field, basically. And the reason I bring this up is because we're talking about a convergence of unconventional technologies, right? And tying this idea that the works that are published or referenced or cataloged are basically wrapping around theoretical and applied physics, because there is now, up to this point, right, 1995, greater general understanding as it relates to these phenomenon, being able to interact with energy fields in various forms, in the macro and the micro, and ultimately it's falling in the realm of physics. So that's where we get things like this quantum mechanics and where we're going now, right? It has to do with physics. So if you don't subscribe to those national labs, look them up. I encourage you to do that. So it says here that peak research activity associated with instrumental psychotronics continued until 2002 and 2003. I'm willing to bet that these technologies are still being worked on. Psychotronics, electronic psychological manipulation, psychotronics. It should be noted that in addition to the program supervised by the SCST USSR, there were several other activities relating to parapsychology. One of them is the Association of Applied Eneology, created in 1989 by the Federation of Soviet Engineers, led by Hans Starov. As stated, there was a close cooperation with the International Academy of Energy Science. In 1991, a fund of parapsychology named Vasilev was created. From 1991 to 2000, the fund published the magazine Parapsychology and Psychophysics. After 1991, a lot of organizations began to appear, such as the Scientific Committee Bioenergy, headed by academician Kazanachev. The Center of Psychotronics and Traditional Healing led Naumov, Wow. So this is translated into English from another language. So the sentence structure is broken. So it just bear with me as I'm trying to read this in real time. The International Committee of the Socio-Scientific Human Ecology and Energoinformatics, Professor, looks like Volchenko, in 1994, the St. Petersburg Energy Technology Center, led by Dulnev, was established. All right, so we have this bioenergy collector and this idea of it coming out of like basically being a torsion field or a torsion generator, right? And so now they're showing you graphs of publications of spin torsion interactions. So the very things that are going to provide, modern or cutting edge energy, future energy distribution, if you will, are the very same things that will be able to interact with other forms of energy like biophysics, bioenergy. And that's what I'm gathering out of this. And that's the real value, in my view, of the Department of Energy and the national laboratories, et cetera, is because the discoveries and work that's being done there apply to things like power generation in the macro and the micro, but it also, the physics that are associated with that directly correlate with how we are going to be able to interact with the energy of life. And so this giant investments in quantum that have been recently announced, upwards to the tune of $2 billion in the United States in the investment of quantum, it's going to the Department of Energy, most of it. And they're going to partner out with corporations and other schools, et cetera, to begin to disperse these ideas and expand innovation. But it's going to really be driven, in my view, through the Department of Energy, and we're in for a wild ride. That's all I got to say about that. We are in for a wild ride. According to many sources, 2003, 2004 represents the end of this period in unconventional research. After 2000, the group of Kreml Physics was dissolved, and the magazine Parapsychology and Psychophysics was closed. Many laboratories were closed in 2004. At the end of 2003, the military unit 10,003, established in 1989 to explore possibilities of the military use of paranormal phenomena, was eliminated. Unfortunately, most of the organizations that arose during the period of the early 90s, without proper funding and in terms of ideological pressure from the Russian Academy of Sciences, no longer existed in the first decade of the 21st century. So this is the real implosion of the Soviet Union and the impoverishment of Russia. And what they're saying here is basically that these fields of study were terminated. So summing up the section on the period from 1980 to 2003, it should be noted that with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, these programs are first reduced and around 2002, 2003 completely closed. Due to a conflict with the Academy of Sciences that is attributed by many authors to the financial conflict inside the SCST, USSR, and not to scientific issues, the whole unconventional research was announced as pseudoscience by the Academy of Sciences. Due to this conflict, even a publication of already obtained high-quality results was stopped. Researchers feared losing their academic jobs. It seemed this conflict caused essential damages to the Russian science in total. In this period, we observe again a cyclical development with breaks in 1917, 1937, and 2003. Due to academic and non-academic researchers, the instrumental psychotronics, denoted sometimes as torsionics, continue to grow, but we cannot speak about government programs in Russia any longer. So now we're going to move to section 7, devices and research of the period 1980 to 2003. As shown in previous section, the breakthrough in unconventional research was archived with the development of the operator-dependent ways to generate and to sense the emission, which was previously detected only by human operators. So we're looking at what they would consider earlier on as paranormal activity or psychic energy or bioenergy. As it becomes more and more understood, it becomes more and more scientifically classified. So biophysics, bioenergy. And what they're saying here is that they're working on devices that are able to sense and understand these emissions and or to be able to generate these emissions that used to only be able to be done by humans from a biological perspective, a biologic perspective. So they're creating synthetic versions of it and understanding the mechanics to such a degree that they're building devices that are able to impart energy or to be able to measure energy. So transmit and receive. A critical amount of experimental data in the field of instrumental generators appeared first in the 1980s. If in the 70s, mostly passive generators, such as that of Stokowski, were developed. Already in the mid-80s, at least 2 active generators were presented. One developed by Otrin. According to some claims, Otrin's generator existed before 1982, and another one developed by Deave. The author claims the devices of Deave were tested at the Institute of Clinical and Experimental Medicine, Academy of Medical Sciences, Director Kazanachev, in 1981. The Deave generator was based on spin polarized materials. In parallel with practical developments, researchers tried to understand the working principles of their devices, and often not from theory to practice, but rather from practice to theory. Successful instruments were analyzed. Researchers then tried to build a theory that would explain how they work. When in the experimental area, a measurable progress was observed. In the theoretical area, many questions remained unanswered. In the period from 1980 to 2003, a large number of such theories appeared. They often required reviewing of all the physics from the 16th century. A short review of that research can be found. Although a detailed analysis of all those approaches would require a much larger work, here we would like to focus on 3 interesting topics that emerged during that period. Research on passive structures, the effects of shapes and forms, the works performed within the state program through the center vent, which received a solid grounding in the theory of Shipov, and studying the impact of generated emissions on a variety of materials and the development of instrumental sensors. So you've got some really interesting shapes and structures here. Look like honeycomb or pipe organs, right? I'm just telling you what I see that might correlate when you deal with complex vibrations and harmonics. Is something that looks like a pyramid. Now you have things that look like coils, and these stand out to me a great deal because we are going to spend a great deal of time looking at coil antennas. They exist everywhere. You likely have one within 3 feet of you. You likely have more than one coil antenna within 3 feet of you right now. And you have this weird looking thing here and these things. The effect of hollow structures, image from 103, that's A, right? Effect of hollow structures. Gould's pyramid at Riga, highway near Moscow. And you have a passive generator, Gamma 7, which is C. So this is a generator, a passive generator. It's able to generate these types of bioenergy. Positronic generators. Notice that it's in a coil. Just bear that in mind. And introduce the discovered effect of hollow structures to see the magazine. Oh, I skipped. My mistake. And D, Delta, the Vanik hedgehog. Not really sure what this device is, the Vanik hedgehog, what it does. Obviously, it looks like it's made of conductive material, and so it likely does some very interesting things in electric fields and magnetic fields. And then this last one, E, Smirnov's passive generator. So passive structure, shape, form, and effect. In 1983, a meeting of Novosibirsk's branch of Entomological Society of USSR, Grebenikov's introduced the discovered effect of hollow structure. The magazine Tanika Mozildi in N6 for 1984 wrote, physiologists, physicists, and doctors are deeply interested in this phenomena, hollow structures. We are carrying out research to find instruments that could capture and detect this effect. Its nature of the phenomenon is not clear, and even approximately. Although the effect of hollow structures was known prior to this publication, for example, from the French authors of the 60s and 70s, both the paper and works of Grebennikov have stimulated a lot of research in the 80s and in the 90s. Venique's hedgehogs, cylinders, researched the effect of pyramids. The first reference in research on Venique hedgehog refers to the period before 1981, but this manuscript apparently had not been published in the 80s. Widely known are Goulad's pyramids, which from the beginning of the 90s were built in many cities of Russia, which triggered a broad public debate. Interesting that the Russians built a bunch of pyramids around their cities in the 1990s. Very, very interesting. It is assumed that passive structures based on so-called shape-form effect are similar to active instrumental generators. So these passive structures, based on how they're made, are similar to active instrumental generators. So they become generators of some type, just being passive. Very interesting. For passive generators were in fact objects of complex geometry. There is even such a notion that Pavlita geometry, known as Pavlita geometry, which should represent the basis of passive generators. Active generators, shown in figure 14, use the effect of forms. Some of such famous structures are shown in figure 12. Works within the center vent. Since the center vent was planned as a central coordinator of the program, all real works were performed by subcontractors with different research organizations. According to Akimov, about 20 such organizations were involved after the collapse of the USSR in 1991. After the funding of programs was reduced, the core of researchers remained connected within the network. They organized and performed special conferences and created various research groups on the territory of the CIS countries. Therefore, the works within the center vent mean, in fact, a very broad section of topics of different authors and of different organizations. The majority of developments in the instrumental psychotronics in Russia from 1991 to 2013 was united in this movement. The vent research program was related to 5 following topics: communication, material research, new sensing technologies, for example, forecasting earthquakes, water cleaning, and medical diagnostics. There are not many known facts about the appearance of the center vent. In backstair financial deals within SCST USSR in 1986 and 1991. According to AkimovaE.com, Akimov in 1977 to 1983 worked at the Moscow Scientific Research Institute of Radio. In 1983 to 1987 at the Research Institute for Communication Systems and Control. And 1987 to 1991 as the department head in the Research Institute of Micro Devices. I'm going to pause here and I want to kind of try to wrap this up neatly. So you have this guy Akimov who's been spent an entire career in parapsychology and positronics. This idea of being able to transmit and receive bioenergy and to manipulate bioenergy, right? That worked in research institutions that dealt with radio for USSR, Russia, right? And then many years at the Institute for Communication Systems and Control, so the transmission, intelligent transmission of radio, all right? Radio, and I'll replace the word radio with wireless communications, cell phones, Wi-Fi, television broadcast, and AM/FM broadcast, and satellite broadcast. Wireless communications. This is for Russia. We have our own, United States. Other countries have their own, right? So I'm not just picking on Russia. This is information about Russia, which is why I'm making that stipulation or specification here. So you have this guy who's involved in understanding bioenergy, being able to capture it, to transmit it, to receive it, to store it, to manipulate it, right? Working at the state institutes for radio, the transmission of radio, which is modern wireless communications as we understand them in all their forms, as well as micro devices, which would be things like cell phones, pagers, cordless telephones, miniaturization of electronics, televisions. So, like I said, I'm not exclusively picking on Russia. What I'm trying to wrap up here and illustrate for you is that there are people who throughout their careers have moved through these various industries that all sort of mesh together that create a large pillar or a large column of this unconventional research, which now is modern warfare. I'll restate that as unconventional modern warfare, delivering kinetic action, right, in the digital space. Research topics covered by Akimov related to communication systems. Thus, we find the theme of communications as the point N1 in the list of unconventional technologies. There are many copies of contracts between the NIIMP and the various research institutes regarding the study of the spin fields, as shown in Figure 13, where the NII or the NIIMP provided generators of torsion fields. In these contracts, Akimov acted as a supervisor on this topic. It can be concluded that the instrumental generators were developed by NIIMP from the second half of the 80s, and the texts of resolutions for the SCST USSR were prepared in this organization. However, the communication experiments from 1986 were performed at the Research Institute for Communication Systems and Control. This implies that many top Soviet research institutes were involved in these programs. As mentioned, the General Hastanarov also prepared a proposal for the program. However, due to some reasons, Akimov's program was accepted. The publications of the Center Vent indicate a very good knowledge of corresponding literary sources, including Western patents, up to the beginning of the 20th century. For example, N4 in the list of technologies, water cleaning with spin generators. This topic has been developed in the 70s by Pavlita. Unfortunately, this topic was not further developed within Vent activities. Direct links to Western patents in the policy document wording of the patent. On the one hand, it can be assumed that spin-or topics were carefully studied and in the NIIMP probably long before 1988. On the other hand, such concepts as the micro-lepton field of A.F. Achtrin, the axion field of Tatur, were not included into the Vent program. This points to a certain ideological competition. Old works on morphogenetic fields of Gurvich or on psychons of Kabozev were also not followed further. So I know that kind of just it sounds disjointed when you read it, but really what this is, these are naming conventions for unconventional technology studies that were either accepted or not accepted by these centralized bureaucracies. And this, in my view, is a fundamental flaw of a centralized government, whereby those in power get to pick and choose based on their relationships and their feelings and not on the viability or the effectiveness of the technologies, whereby corruption in and of itself stifles innovation due to the incessant desire simply to exercise power over everything else, where the decision and the act of exercising power takes precedent over everything else. And that ideology that comes with a centralized type of a society stifles innovation, stifles creativity, and all of the benefits that come with it. The word torsion appeared after 1990, probably in 1991. Before 1990, the spin concept was used. In the list of Akimov's publications, one of the first works about spin systems refers to 1987 in collaboration with Boldyareva and Satina. Boldyareva described the Akimov around 1986 to 1987, was greatly impressed by the work Dev had done with spin polarized materials. This basis of work represents the model of Dirac vacuum. After the start of cooperation with Shipov, the concept received the name torsion or spin torsion and includes the torsion effects. So what we're talking about here is the Russian discoveries and implementations or adoptions, if you will, of spin torsion or torsion technologies, which that's what they're telling us today is what our national labs are innovating and working on today. And this stuff was done back in the 80s, and they're just now coming out saying that they're making these profound discoveries today. And that's why I made the comments earlier about subscribing to the national laboratories, because this stuff it's already been done. This stuff's already been done, and what they're really doing with it now are fine tuning it and using these advanced, sophisticated, well-studied sciences, and they're doing things. They're announcing to us that they're making these discoveries, but in my view, what they're doing is they're taking the underpinning principles, the physics of them, and learning how to cross-apply them into environments that aren't restricted to a laboratory. How do you apply these things in the real world? So they roll this stuff out from, for example, the national laboratories, and we did this in the lab and it's the first time ever, and da-da-da-da. Okay, great. Sounds fantastic. Yay, rah, rah. But the reality is I think they're trying to roll these technologies out into the public space using commonly available manufacturing techniques and devices, and being able to understand the physics, the finer nuances of the physics of things like torsion fields and spin torsion and quantum mechanics and all this, understanding the nuances so well that they are able to cross-apply or be able to manifest, extract, manipulate these sciences, these scientific principles using techniques and or materials or combination of those things that already are deployed or that can be deployed cheaply using what's already existing in the supply chain. And if it's not, coming up with solutions in order to proliferate the necessary components into the supply chain. And when you look at the programs, some of the programs that DARPA is working on, for example, it's these high efficiency resonators at the millimeter wave scale, so that 5G will work better, and so that your antennas on your phones and in the transmitters are able to scale in frequency and do so cheaply and do so at tremendously efficient energy levels, and be able to scale power by exploiting the fundamentals of physics. So the transmission characteristics can be generated with incredibly low power, and you're able to generate massive amounts of power somewhere else by exploiting the laws of physics. Stuff that could only have been done in the lab now being deployed out in the environment today. And that's just one example. It's literally just one example. So we are on a precipice. Humanity is on a precipice where you have material sciences, you have the classical sciences, you have unconventional sciences, you have manufacturing, you have computing, you have scalability. All of the necessary components are technologically advanced enough so that they can now fuse together, and we are going to see radical jumps in just about every industry. If the technology is released, we will see radical changes in everything. And it's going to reshape our lives. It's going to reshape how we communicate, how we interact, how we travel, what we wear, what we eat, what we consider is normal and not normal, what we consider is generally understood layman's knowledge, and what is going to be dismissed. At one point, everybody thought the earth was flat, just to give you an example. At one point, everybody thought a horse was the only way and the best, most efficient way to travel by land. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. We're literally right there as a society. And that's the push from the World Economic Forum and others about this whole idea of the fourth industrial revolution. That's their way of saying that and framing it in such a way that is palatable to the general public. And the reality is that is just the window dressing of a great deal of other things that are going to happen simultaneously. Medicine, education, entertainment, everything, literally everything. So yeah, all that off of spin torsion generators. Let's get back to the document. So, however, analyzing literature prepared probably by intelligence services, which means it was likely washed or cleaned before it was published, comparing Plutoff's and Akimov's patent, we found a number of evidences that the issue of torsion generators is closely related to the Aharonov-Bohm effect and to several effects of quantum phenomena in macroscopic systems. It is very characteristic that patents and the work appeared in a short time at the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s. Moreover, it seems this represents a connection between Russian spin torsion and Western quantum works. Almost all experiments in the late 80s and early 90s within state programs were performed with so-called small and large Akimov's generators. And look at what we have here. Some really, really cool looking stuff, right? Examples of instrumental generators of a high penetrating radiation developed at the NIIMP or under contracts at the center vent. Small and large Akimov generators. Generators of Smirnov are images C and D. So they are similar in nature, but different to some extent. And when you look at these things, these are electronic devices, right? You have inputs and outputs. You have a place to put cabling in here that are likely going to drive certain signals or frequencies. These might be polarity switches, a high and a low switch, fairly complex instrumentation with these crazy generators to develop. What I see when I look at this is a device that's able to emit energy that has very ordered, yet highly complex harmonic energy. So you have frequencies that are generated that through this device either create their own resonance and then can be tuned in such a way where they can generate higher resonances or lower resonances from whatever frequency goes in this thing, or it's multiple frequencies of that are they have resonances, like they correlate with each other, that are simultaneously pumped into a device like this that they're able to then tune and harness. So highly sophisticated, complex energy tools, if you will. And these are lab type prototype stuff. And this is how everything goes. As soon as you get a proof of concept and you understand the principles that are involved here, then the energy is applied to how do you miniaturize it? How do you make it useful outside of a laboratory environment? And the rate at which we can scale those things today is exponentially faster than what it was in the 1980s and the 1990s. And that's part of what I was describing earlier as it relates to the fusion or the marrying together of all of these mature fields, material sciences, physics, manufacturing, all of it being able to be put together so that things like bringing it out into the open environment, miniaturizing it, finding cross applications so that it can be basically infused into the markets and paid for through the purchasing, through consumerism. All of these problems you can find solutions to them today much easier than you could 30, 40, 50 years ago. And this is that acceleration. And in my view, part of this one of the underpinning components of the fourth industrial revolution, because that's really where success, in my view, will be measured. You're going to have people that are going to say, we want this, this, and this infused into society. And then the race will be on to figure out ways to infuse those concepts, those ideas, those tools into society, but do so in a way that consumers accept it, or that industry accepts it, or that it becomes adopted as a new way or a new standard, usually under the guise of health and or safety and or convenience. And this is the larger ordered manipulation, in my view. When we start looking at antennas, hopefully you'll see what I see. While the antennas provide things like near field communication, tap to pay, or near field communication identification, where your phone then serves as a door lock, a key for your car or for your place of business. The very antennas that are used for that type of convenience can also be tuned to generate static magnetic fields or static electric fields for that device to sense what's going on around it in real time, to image your body, to understand the various permeability characteristics of your fat versus your muscle versus your organs versus your bone, to understand movements based on the change in the electric fields, to be able to generate magnetic fields that you then are exposed to. But meanwhile, you think you have it because it only does this. It allows me to pay for my coffee, or it allows me to, I can just walk through the subway station and I don't have to get a token, or I don't have a card. It just bills me, and it knows. And so when I get up to the place to go through the little turnstile, then it lets me go through, and I know I'm going to get a bill for X number of passes through the subway system, because it's reading this stuff through the near field technology, which is just one technology in your phone, for example. And so the point of that long narrative there is really to give you one example of how things that look super complex in a laboratory environment, you're like, why does this matter? And it really matters because in a laboratory environment, the idea is to clearly understand and define some fundamentals about an idea, topic, concern, hypothesis, whatever it is. And then after that is established and considered fact, then it's how do we miniaturize it, normalize it, and proliferate it if we think it's useful. And then what other things can it do in order to be able to assign or associate a value to it so that it is accepted when it's deployed. And that is what your modern sensor platform is today, known as a cell phone, known as a tablet. That's what they are. And the new technologies that go in them, that's what they do. They sense. And what we've seen here is that based on known physical phenomenon, based on their structure, based on what they can do, a sensor can also be a generator. So off we go. We'll continue down this path here. Okay, so enough on these generators. Let's see where else they're going with this. Development of instrumental sensors. One of the main problems associated with the high penetrating radiation is the problem of how to detect this radiation. Without generators, it is not possible to develop the sensors, and without sensors, it's not possible to design generators. This is a well-known cycle of instrumental psychotronics. Without resolving this problem, it is impossible to do research in this area. In the early 80s, there were already some principles of detection known based on Khosrow's work, changing the conductivity of materials and the impact on mechanical systems. Works of Chevsky's settling red blood cells, interesting, and the Curlin effect, a glow in the strong EM field. In addition to this, widely used methods were dowsing, more generally biolocation, and biological sensors, such as the germination test. In 1982 to 1984, some research on Khosrow's method was carried out, in particular with biological systems. However, these works were fragmented. Researchers often did not know each other. The situation was substantially changed after 1989. In 1988, the first note of Bobrov about the electric double layer as a sensor had appeared. In his book, he confirmed the program of the USSR's Ministry of Defense on the study of physics and instrumental psychotronics. Bobrov's EDL sensors have been proven as very sensitive devices. The book, edited by Lunev, describes the work carried out at the Tomsk Polytechnic University from 1983 to 1993, including a number of sensors based on quartz resonators and detectors of radioactivity. In 1989, a patent of Sergeyev on capacitive sensors is issued. Since 1989, various tests with crystallized structures are conducted, and further with the melting of metals. Attempts were made to develop sensors on that basis. In the early 90s, sensors of Kravchenko appeared based on measurements of electric fields. In the Institute of Physics, St. Petersburg State University, the results related to Khosrow's sensors are verified. These and other works have stimulated development of solid-state sensors. The book of Dulnev and colleagues describes the research conducted between 1995 and 1998 at the Center of Energy and Information Technologies at the St. Petersburg State Institute of Fine Mechanics and Optics. In those experiments, more biological, optical, magnetic, and thermal sensors are used. Interesting works are performed on bioelectrogenesis of plants and the application of such sensors in experiments. By 2000, there is already a large amount of works on the impact of high penetrating radiation on different semiconductor devices. In the review in 2013 related to metrology of high penetrating emission, there are 19 groups of physical effects that can represent the basis of the development of sensors with dozens of technical sensors. So what we just read, when I was reading it, a lot of those sensors that they were developing, trying to understand how to measure, and then came up with sensors that did measure and then validated that what they were measuring was actually what they wanted, which then validated the sensor. And you had this whole, it's the infancy of this idea of developing sophisticated sensors or sensors that worked in conjunction with each other. Those all now have been put in something like your phone. Solid state, function off magnetic fields or voltages or whatever in order to tune them and in order to measure their effectiveness and or to calibrate them, and they work in tandem with each other. And now all of these things that would be big, bulky, and sit on a table have been miniaturized and put in a nice, sexy, sleek form factor like an iPhone. 40 years later. And it wasn't even 40 years later. When you think of the implementation or the rollout of a smartphone, it was in the 2000s, the early 2000s. And this stuff was talking about 1995 and 1998 and 1989. You can go back as far as 83. So you're looking at a cycle time of 20 years to start putting these things in every single person's pocket. And it's very important, in my opinion, to understand this concept, where something in a lab that would take lots of money to develop and refine, ultimately and perfect, to then scale it so that it's deployable cheaply, efficiently, and works good enough to be useful and put into the hands of as many people as possible, and then connect it to the internet. And that's where we are. And we just looked at a few in an example in one document that's talking about, in this case, psychotronic related research. This idea of understanding biophysical energy and being able to interact with biological life forms, plants, animals, and humans. Notice that they talked about capacitive sensors. It's important to remember capacitive sensors. Capacitive sensors are proximity sensors that exist in all modern mobile devices. Proximity sensors. Proximity sensors. They generally work off of a coil antenna. However, they do work off of an inverted plain RF antenna and other types of antennas. What it is it's an electric field, and it's a stable, known electric field, and it can be manipulated, it can be tuned. But what it does is it measures the change in the electric field when things are around it. It's so sophisticated that it understands if the phone is oriented face up or face down. It understands if the phone is on a glass tabletop, a wood tabletop, or a stone tabletop. It understands if the device is in your hand. It understands if the device is in your pocket. It understands if the device is against your head. And it doesn't do this with a camera, and it doesn't do this with a gyrometer or a magnetometer or any of those things, although it may use those other sensors to refine or improve the probability of whatever it's trying to calculate. But a lot of that is done with a capacitive sensor that generates and that emits an electric field. And in a Google patent in particular, it talks about these capacitive sensors actually using the human to complete the circuit. So you become a grounding element when you make contact with this thing, when you physically make contact with it, and or when you're close enough to it to interfere or interact with the capacitive field. And we will look at nervous system manipulation patents that discuss using a fringe field or an electric field, which is exactly what a capacitive field is, to go in and do things like make you go to sleep or make you sexually excited. And that's just using one resonance frequency. The other thing we will look at are these antennas using the same frequencies that are used for capacitive field sensing. Those frequencies are actually carrier frequencies, whereby other lower frequencies like 500 hertz or less are overlaid or modulated on top of these carrier frequencies, which are the same frequencies generated from the capacitive sensors in your phone that do things like irritate you, make you happy. They can do things like clean your blood. They can do things like start regrowing bone or repairing tissue. The sky is the limit. And that's why we haven't gotten into antennas yet, because I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around it. It is incredibly sophisticated. And to find the patents and organize them in such a way and lay this out so that you can say, okay, we've got a patent from a tech company and a patent from a medical company, and they're using the very same device. And with the tech company patent, it says that this thing is able to sense and understand the local environment. And with the medical patent, it says that using the same general frequencies, that medically speaking, you can do these things to a person to help or hurt them. and then trying to sandwich those two together, maybe with another one or two for supporting information, and then present that. It's proving very challenging, but I'm very, very close to being able to do that. And that's why we're going through this information in the detail that we are, because I really want to clarify and illustrate for you just how long these studies have been conducted, and at the scales at which these studies have been conducted, in order to help illustrate that these ideas have been spread across just about every industry. And when you go high enough on the food chain, you have all of these pieces at your disposal, because you ultimately have influence over a society's economy, and then can dictate what is moving through the economy, and then can also dictate what you want people to consume, so that your tools, mechanisms, puzzle pieces that create a larger overarching structure can be deployed. So here we go. The appearance of generators and detectors of high penetrating radiation in 2003 and 2004 indicate the beginning of a new stage in the development of instrumental psychotronics. These effects can be examined by independent researchers and even by non-technical, for example, biologists, experts. This factor played a major role in the evolution of this research area after minimizing and closing governmental programs. So they really just summarized what I just said in a very generic way. So what they're looking at are psychotronic generators, psychotronic sensors that deal with the transmission of radiation that can be observed by independent researchers and even by non-technical people, such as biologists, where they go, look, I have this device. Look, I'm going to turn it on. Look, I'm doing something specific with this device. Watch the person over there. Do you see their change in the behavior? Do you see them sweating? Do you see them starting to twitch? Do you see their eyes rolling in the back of their head? Do you see this, that, and the other? Or biologists, do you see plants growing? Do you see plants dying? Do you see bugs drawing near? Do you see them going away? Using electronic devices that interact with bioenergy systems, bioenergy fields. That is what this is saying. And they're saying, based in the Soviet Union, their circumstances, I should say, that this factor played a major role in the evolution of the research after minimizing and closing governmental programs, because they saw value in it. So with the money and the resources and the time they had left or remaining, as their infrastructure scaled down, as their economy scaled down, as they were systematically imploded, these types of programs continued. Can you imagine what DARPA has? Can you imagine what a social platform like Twitter or Facebook has access to when we think about the number of devices that they come into contact with? And the fact that Facebook comes preloaded into the firmware or the middleware of everything, up to and including televisions, computers, tablets, phones, and more. And that these applications, in order to work or function, get access to things like your antennas, get access to your microphone, get access to your camera, get access to the databases and the memory chips and everything else on your mobile devices. These are the modern oligarchical governments of today. These are the technocracy components. The technocracy apparatus is big tech. These are the technocratic leaders, and they know it, and they're arrogant, and that's why they run around and do what they do. They say three things, and they all conflict, and they look at you like, so what? You love me because I'm popular and I'm synthetic Hollywoodish, but I'm better than Hollywood because I really command and control this large monolithic overarching platform whereby you tell us everything about you and you socialize and you conduct commerce and share your relationships, and all of that's just one layer. You dumb humans have no idea what else can be done with the systems that we have constructed at the behest of fill in the blank. DARPA, CIA, intelligence agency XYZ. I mean, we have 17 of them, 16 of them just in the United States. And now extrapolate those ideas or concepts out to every other country and all of those other partnerships and all the other corporate partnerships that are then used as the facade, as the face in this civilian sector to roll out, deploy, and manage these networks and these devices and these services. And what does subversion look like? What does infiltration look like? What does a what does a government look like that that doesn't have the flag, the country's flag behind them? What does a multinational global government look like? When you look at the nuts and bolts of a global government, does it have to have a flag? The answer is no. Technocracy is global government. Technocracy is global government. Conclusion of this document. To sum up this review, first of all, we note a characteristic feature of Soviet and Russian programs, specific position of the state, which during the entire existence of the Soviet Union has funded certain areas of parapsychology and blocked all others. In addition, since 1917, international contacts have been significantly reduced or even discontinued. As a result of this, the USSR, since the early 70s, began to shape a specific area of instrumental psychotronics. By 2003 and 2004, with the development of sensors capable of detecting a high penetrating emission, an entirely independent line of research had emerged in Russia. These combined sources and detectors of radiation and explored the appeared effects in a variety of materials and systems, analyzing Western works such as the USPA and the SSE conferences, the corresponding European and American magazines. We note only a small number of publications on related topics. Second, an existence of many enthusiastic researchers in Russia after 1991 should be underlined. The concept of firm in the garage, widely known in the West, has a special meaning in Russia, since many studies have been performed not only by the academic community, but also by private researchers regarding the difficulties in these works. We can now refer to the statements of Plekhanov, Kulagina, Dulnev, Bobrov, and many others. It should be noted that the Soviet Union coordinated the activities in this area at the Scientific Council of the USSR's Academy of Science in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. While after 1991, the Academy of Sciences suddenly announced this research as pseudo-scientific. Such rapid changes, surprising, and is an argument in favor of the hypothesis that this was primarily related to financial issues within the SCST USSR. Regarding the funding, we found the following data. The DIA report, Controlled Offensive Behavior, which we are going to begin to read here very shortly. Defense Intelligence Agency's report, that's an American intelligence agency, Defense Intelligence Agency report, which is entitled Controlled Offensive Behavior of the USSR, July 1972, estimated the budget $21 million in 1967 in the Area 1. Hansterev's estimation, about 700 involved researchers after 1987, about 7 million rubles per year in the Area 1. Akimov's estimation, about the required 500 million ruble in 1990 and 1995, the Area 3. Data from, looks like citation 97, spent 23 million rubles from the Ministry of Defense around 1986 to 1989. Estimated 400 involved researchers after 1990, about 4 million rubles per year in the Area 1. Data about the military unit 10,003, which consumed 4 million rubles per year, existed for 15 years in the Area 1. Based on these data, it can be estimated that open funding in the 80s and 90s was between 200 million and 400 million. Extrapolating data from the 60s and 70s, it can be assumed that the upper boundary for open funding in after-war programs, as post-World War II, was about 500 million. That's insane. However, there is no data about the studies from KGB and USSR's Ministry of Defense in Areas 1 and 2. Bobrov and did discussions reported about studies performed at Gagarin Air Force Academy in Monino and by St. Petersburg, Mechnikov State Medical Academy in the 80s and 90s. These studies are open and covered a large number of technical systems and human operators. It would make sense to assume that classified programs in the Area 1 were larger than the open programs. Since the Area 2 was a strategic program, its funding should be assumed larger than that of 1 and 3. In total, we can assume an upper boundary of $500 million to $1 billion for all the areas within 40 years. That is quite a bit of money in 40 years to spend on positronic bioenergetic research. It is vital to repeat these are estimates based on published data and some common sense consideration. To compare, US Stargate program cost about 20 million. Some programs for non-lethal technologies, 37.2 million. MK Ultra, 87.5 million. Thus, Soviet and US costs are comparable, at least on a level of separate programs. Third, it needs to underline the ethical position in instrumental psychotronics. Akimov in 1995 at the conference, KGB yesterday, today and tomorrow wrote, "As we are the leading organization in Russia on torsion technologies, I can responsibly say that while technological experiments allow sometimes obtaining results that go far beyond our fantasy, modern torsion generators are rather primitive, and it is difficult to expect that tomorrow or the day after tomorrow may appear sources of torsion radiation that could solve the problem of controlling human behavior. I do not believe in this. There is an international organization of scientists involved in the study of electromagnetic radiation, including their effects on humans. From a technical point of view, there is no reason why it would be impossible to make a machine which impacts the human. And I have no doubt about the fact that this kind of technique exists in many countries of the world." This was in 1995. And in the United States, the Telecommunications Act of 1934 was revised in 1996. And you can look that up. And that is during the Clinton presidency. And that is when radiation limitations were set as it relates to mobile communications. They were updated and they really haven't changed much since. And it's also when they made some additional rulings as it relates to the way that cable television is able to be broadcast, where they basically opened up more advanced, more sophisticated modulation techniques in order to allow more channels to be transmitted over the same frequency spectrum. Keyword out of that is advanced modulation, being able to modulate and manipulate the energy waveforms that are transmitted or broadcast. And that was in 1996 in the United States. More on that as time permits. The technology that was primitive in 1995 has become less primitive in 2013 and will become even more advanced in the future. Even now, it is not too difficult to develop a high-power generator based on the Plutchtov's patent, Akimov's patent, or results of many other researchers. We also do not believe that human behavior We also do not believe that human behavior can be controlled. However, we want to draw attention to the significant potential of a long-term use of these devices and the risk of unethical use of this technology for so-called mild correction. What's the difference? Such as the PID effect studied in plants and laboratory animals and others. To conclude this work, it should be noted that after 2003, the instrumental Psychotronics in Russia was developing further, although not as fast as before. There are conferences, workshops, seminars, and published specialized journals. According to citation 16, the number of Russian researchers in the areas around instrumental psychotronics is between 400 and 700 between 1987 and 1993. Currently, based on major conferences, this number can be estimated between 200 and 500. We believe that this figure is kept at this level and beyond, but there is a noticeable increase in the age of researchers. There is also an interesting process of distributing this research to the West. First of all, it is done by researchers from the CIS counties and who is living in Western countries. This is also happening due to the inclusion of countries from the former Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact in the EU, and the gradual introduction of these works in Western research organizations. So, when you look at the geopolitical events and you look at the real value, what is the real value when countries form partnerships? It is based on economics, right? Geographics has a play. But when you start looking at economics, you start looking at resources, and then you try to understand and monetize and quantify resources. You commoditize resources. And technology and intellectual property are very much considered a valuable resource. And so when we look at these last few statements here, the fall of the Soviet Union ushered in the necessity for an inclusion of these Soviet Union, Soviet bloc countries to migrate over to the EU and no longer stay within the confines of the parent company, Russia. So, in my view, Russia has been deleveraged on purpose for centuries at this point. And it's obvious to see why. I mean, if they're the ones that really did develop these types of technologies, good God. I mean, they've got some incredibly smart, resourceful people. So it's just remarkable. So we're gonna browse this CIA library for a minute, and then we're going to get into controlled offensive behavior. Wow, we only have a half an hour. Maybe we'll save controlled offensive behavior for the next show. And we will spend 30 minutes browsing through the CIA library. Key search word, telepathy. So let's make sure we're on page 1 here. Yeah, we're on page 1. And we're just gonna kind of read these out, and we might look at some of them, we might not, but this is in the show notes. And for those of you that don't have the show notes, just go to cia.gov/library/reading room, and there will be a search bar, and type in telepathy, and you will get these documents. Scientists advance hypothesis, quantum telepathy. Tells the doctor of psychological sciences. Quantum telepathy. Well, I'm curious, so we're not going to get very far through this list. Telepathy, and here's the document. So let's just have a look. Oh, it's redacted. Pushkin. I've seen this name before. redacted. Scientists advance hypothesis, quantum telepathy. This was, looks like it was released in 2000. Until recently, to me, it seemed that there is no another such science which would contain so many mysteries and riddles. How much psychology? So this is translated. It looks like from Russian or something. We're not gonna read this. I'm going to read it later, though, because this stuff is interesting to me. So let's continue. Telepathy could be real. 1878. There's citations in here. So they've been looking at this. What I read just from this headline, right, is they've been looking at this idea of telepathy and trying to understand how it works for a long, long time. Long time. So let's keep going. Inquiry concerning research on ESP, extrasensory perception, telepathy. This was looks like back in the 60s. Experimental dream telepathy, clairvoyance. Geomagnetic activity, inquiry concerning research on extrasensory perception and telepathy, handwritten notes on optimal conditions for telepathy. That sounds interesting. Stargate. Let's look at this one. Let's just see what it says. Why didn't it, come on. Oh, that's why. I get it. So it's literally titling it that it's a handwritten note on telepathy. Well, those of you that are good at reading penmanship, good luck, should you choose to read that. I'm not going to. Telepathic behavior modification. What? That's section 4 in this one. 1998. So this looks like document back in 1975. Telepathic behavior modification. Behavior modification through telepathic means is in itself applied research. The changes or alterations of human activity desired can be either beneficial or detrimental to the percipient. Soviet research in the field of behavior modification by telepathy dating from the early 1920s through the early 1970s has had one major objective: application of techniques. In telepathy research, unlike research in most scientific disciplines, the applied phase preceded the basic phase. To put it simply, this is why telepathy is still called a phenomenon, both in the USSR and the West. The phenomenon of telepathy has many applications, one of which is behavior modification. Basic research, therefore, applies to the phenomenon itself. This is covered in Part 1, Section 2, and Part 2, Psychotronic Generator Research. Applied research. Between 1920 and 1943, Vasiliev conducted numerous experiments involving telepathic mental suggestion. His first work involved the mental suggestion of motor or muscle movements. This early work was based in part on published results of similar experiments conducted by Dr. Jaurès of France, Lille, France. Vasiliev's human test subjects were asked to perform various muscular movements through a medium of telepathy. For comparative purposes, some tests were made with hypnotized recipients, while others were placed only in a relaxed state. During the same time frame, 1920 to 1943, Vasiliev also conducted experiments involving the mental suggestion of visual images and sensations with and without hypnosis. Vasiliev's results indicated it was altogether possible to telepathically suggest and produce voluntary, controllable motor acts, as well as influence involuntary, uncontrollable movements. He noted that some of the best subjects for the suggestion of motor acts were unsuitable for mental suggestion of visual images and vice versa. Apparently, there was no visible positive correlation between these two variants of telepathic susceptibility. Telepathic susceptibility. Some of the subjects under hypnosis responded more readily to verbal suggestion of the sensory nature, while others were more responsible to verbal suggestion of motor type. This observed variance applied for both mental and verbal suggestive techniques. After a thorough series of experiments, Vassiliev concluded that mental suggestion involving hypnosis would provide most fruitful results. According to Ostrander Schrodinger, the ability to telepathically produce sleep-awake states, obliteration of one's consciousness, from a distance of a few meters to over 1,000 kilometers became the most thoroughly tested and perfected Soviet contribution to international parapsychology. Whoa. Parapsychologists in Leningrad and Moscow demonstrated the telepathic manipulation of consciousness and correlated it with systematic EEG recordings. The Nabarov-Sergeyev-Pavlova team found that EEG recordings changed dramatically when the telepathic impulse contained a message affecting human emotions. Transmission of several successive emotions of a negative character elicited the appearance of a cross-excitation of the brain. It changed the spontaneous EEG character to the tired state of the brain, dominated by slow, hypersynchronized waves of the delta and theta type. Percipients of unpleasant emotions, followed by positive emotions, feeling of calmness and cheerfulness, regained normalized EEGs within 1 to 3 minutes. Other Soviet tests included sending to the percipient the anxiety associated with suffocation and the sensation of a dizzying blow to the head. Pavlova, Sergeyev, and Naumov uncovered impressive data on the power of thought and concluded that a person doesn't have to conjure up his own nasty thoughts. Someone else can do it and telepathically transmit them to him. Whoa. Serov and Troskin of Severodvinsk demonstrated that the number of white blood cells rose by 1,500 after they suggested positive emotions to patients. More important was the observation that after impressing negative emotion, the white cell count decreased by 1,600. Since leukocytes are one of the body's main defense mechanisms against disease, such a telepathically imposed shift in a cell count could be used in altering human health. In similar research, the Czechs found that intense mental activity in the sender caused at a distance a slight change in blood volume in a resting participant. Measurements were made with a plethysmograph. Experiments in the West have verified this phenomenon. Soviet and Czech researchers in manipulative telepathic techniques has also included experimental transmission of kinetic impulses, sound, and taste. And this document was in 1972. In 1972. And they're talking about sending kinetic impulses, right? Muscle movements, sending sound and sending taste remotely to somebody else and being able to measure a response. Do I need to show you the Huawei document on human bond communication? Again, we'll go over it again. It happens to be one of my favorites. Outside of the Soviet and Czech research on the manipulative possibilities of PK and positronic generators, I think that's psychokinesis, the emphasis on manipulation by means of telepathy still involves the use of hypnotism. Many Soviet and Czech scientists are using this technique as a means to try to identify the carrier of telepathy, but others may be conducting such research for more devious reasons. Dr. Stefan Markowski of Poland predicted that the field of telepathy will open new avenues for spreading propaganda. He feels that the electromagnetic theory is valid and believes, therefore, that telepathy can be amplified like radio waves. Telepathy would then become a subtle new modus for the influencers of the world. Some Western followers of psychic phenomenon research are concerned, for example, with the detrimental effects of subliminal perception techniques being targeted against U.S. or allied personnel in nuclear missile silos. Creepy. The subliminal message could be carried by television signals or by telepathic means. So, for example, just imagine everybody watching that Netflix show, Cuties, right? And then through the transmission of that program to your mobile device, you get the physical and emotional stimulation of eroticism and arousal artificially implanted into your nervous system and your brain, so that when you're watching something like Cuties, you get a physiological response that reinforces a desired or an intended behavior, thus furthering the normalization of pedophilia throughout society. It's disgusting. And in my view, if that's being done, it needs to be shut the fuck down. Pardon my language, I'm getting very angry. Let's continue. I'll show you a patent that discusses the manipulation of a nervous system through electromagnetic fields and through monitors. They can do this with flickering light and sound and electromagnetics. Better yet, let's look at it now. We got 15 minutes. Defense Intelligence Agency report, observed behavior, controlled offensive behavior. Excuse me. I'm a little pissed off right now. So, and I'll show you what I mean. I'm not just saying that to shock you, because it's absolutely true and possible. And when I say true, I'm not saying it's being done. What I'm saying is that these technologies exist. And when you think about the psychotic nature and where we're going as a species down the rat hole into hell, it's that kind of stuff that's doing it. So, human behavior manipulation, general review, military psychology, Soviet use of psychology for behavior manipulation, manipulation of smell or olfactory phenomena, the use of light, sound, electromagnetic energy, psychological phenomena, psychological weapons, techniques, ESP, psychokinesis, military implications, hypnosis, conditioning through suggestion, subliminal perception, psychotropic substances. So now we're looking at that medication stuff that people take for all their stresses and ailments, SSRIs and, Valiums and all that other crap. Psycho warfare agents, LSD, psilocybin. Current research interest in psychopharmacology, psycho-optics, Soviet research into photic flicker, so the flicker rates on your monitors, color and light. And there's more. Behavioral altering possibilities, sounds as a means of altering behavior, infrasonic noise or sound or pressure waves that are generated below what the human can hear. Sonic noise, ultrasonic noise. So beneath what humans can hear, infrasonic, sonic noise, what humans can hear, the hearing range that we can hear, and ultrasonic above human hearing. Sensory deprivation, electromagnetic effects. Future trends, more on electromagnetic effects. So we have light, we have sound, we have electromagnetics that are discussed at some level throughout this document. It is 100 and some odd pages. It's 177 pages. So we will spend time browsing this document, albeit this is a very old document. It was released in 2003. And so we can surmise, this is back in 1972, data publication from the DIA, right? So the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency of the United States, put this together and published it in 1972, and they were working on these technologies. So we will spend some time on that. Let's go back to this other stuff here. The potential applications of focusing mental influence on enemy through hypnotic telepathy have surely occurred in the Soviets. The bulk of recent telepathy research in the USSR has been concerned with the transmission of emotional or behavioral impulses and the study of psychological responses to PK exercises, etc. In their exploration of telepathy, they are seeking the eventual capability to reproduce and amplify the phenomena so that control is feasible. Control and manipulation of the human consciousness must be considered a primary goal. And it looks like this is a copy of a copy, right? So they're talking about synthetic telepathy. Conclusion, right? There is as yet no convincing experimental evidence of direct mind-to-mind communication. This is back in the 70s. Telepathy that adequately controls for clairvoyance or precognition. Nonetheless, indirect support for the telepathy hypothesis comes from several experiments in which significant differences between GESP and clairvoyance scores were found with recipients were blind to the test or the type of tests. However, these results have not been entirely consistent, and some of the positive experiments have weaknesses in design or reporting of the results. Other evidences indicate that some of these inconsistencies may be attributed to the fact that different agents often affect recipient scores in different ways. Attempts to demonstrate that persons well-known or well-liked by recipients make the most successful agents have produced conflicting results, although the general trend is confirmatory. Finally, the question of whether telepathy, assuming its existence, is primarily attributable to the agent, the recipient, or some interaction between them has yet to be directly addressed experimentally. So telepathic behavior modification. And when we start looking at the manipulation of ion channels, we'll go back and look at this idea of controlling the ion flow through the membranes in your neurons, which is what Dr. Robert Duncan was talking about, which is the ion cyclotron resonance. There are patents that discuss the possibility of this, and we will look at that. And if you can directly control regions of the brain through resonance and through the use of resonance, control the ion flow in different regions of the brain, I'm postulating to you that remote manipulation, modification, and perhaps even synthetic telepathy is currently possible today without a Neuralink implant. And when you look at technologies accessible to the president, for example, consider the possibilities of what modern surveillance looks like when you have a mobile phone right next to your body that can put complex electromagnetic waves and complex electric and/or magnetic fields simultaneously into and through your body, with some of the patents that we've looked at that discuss whole body radiation, whether it be with a magnetic field or an electromagnetic field or an electric field, whole body radiation, and using specific resonance characteristics. It doesn't matter how much of the body you irradiate, you're able to communicate, interact with specific neural circuits, specific regions of the brain, specific components of the nervous system, and do so in more than one system or place or location simultaneously. And that company is by the name of BrainQ. And that company is funded currently as a startup through Google. And there are many other patents to support similar research studies as it relates to resonating specific locations in the brain with electromagnetic energy. And then you cross-reference that with the patents that you can look up as it relates to the manipulation of the brain using ultrasound. And when you look at ultrasound related patents, they are able to synthetically create all 5 senses, including involuntary muscle movements, using ultrasound into the brain. Dr. Steven Tyler from Arizona State University actually has a few of those. And we will go over those when we start looking at this concept that's considered or called cerebral programming. Cerebral programming. We're not quite there yet. We still have to go through antennas. Cerebral programming. You can look that patent up for you. Tell you what, I'll show you right now. I'm pretty sure I have it saved here. If it's not here, it's probably going to be on the spreadsheet that I have. No, it's not here. So we will look at the spreadsheet. As you can see, I am compiling a great deal of information that over time I will share that spans the whole scale: electronics, biometrics, nanotechnology, antennas, network access, radar, electromedical patents. And that's just, this is just a main patent page. I've got an antenna page that's basically all the new antenna stuff, or some of the new antenna stuff that's coming out in your iPhone and your Android phone, some MIT information that correlates with some of that, and wireless energy transfer stuff that's designed to remotely power devices. So we're going to be going over that. I'm building out electromedicine in order to help illustrate what ion channel flow is, what it does, and different resonance type technologies. And then we have this idea of cerebral programming, and I'm not done building this list out quite yet. But what we have here, let me see if I can find cerebral program. Yeah, let me see if I can go over to patents. It should be in here. Nope. Hang on. I'm gonna mute you real quick. So I actually went and found the patent that I printed, and I've marked up. So I'll just show you the patent that literally has the name cerebral programming. There's others that are similar and actually better, but this one will suffice for now. And the patent number is US 7499894. Cerebral programming. A method of training a biological neural network, your brain, stimulating a neural network by something, a controller, detecting an output. So we're talking about EEG, right? And looking at it and providing modifying stimulation if the response doesn't match what the desired response is. If it does match, then you just carry on repeating a cycle of stimulation. And so what this is it's playing the harp or the piano in your brain to do things like cognitive or psychiatric applications. Things like Alzheimer's disease and dementia are treatable with this kind of technology. And yeah, I still need to finish going through this patent, as a matter of fact. I'll show you some of the associated patents down here at the bottom. We have a couple minutes left, so we'll just kind of end here. As you can see, this patent is incredibly extensive. Down here, we will see many, many more similar documents, patent citations. Where are you? I'm looking for cited by. And the reason why is because they actually have other patents here that literally talk about overlaying one person's brainwaves on top of somebody else's. Yeah, cited by, here we go. Mobile wearable electromagnetic brain activity monitor, signal noise reduction. Let me look for another one. I've got another one over here on my table, as a matter of fact. I'll bring the stack over here. This one right here, cognitive enhancement using feedback. Let's see if we can search for this one. And we will go over these as time goes on. See if it shows up. If it doesn't, we'll just search for it. Nope. So I haven't finished the workups on these quite yet. So we'll just type in the patent. This patent is 9943698 B2, cognitive enhancement using feedback. This one talks about determining a target frequency corresponding to a target brain state and stimulating a brain in order to get feedback to attempt to achieve a targeted brain state. Stimulating step may include measuring an electrical output of the brain, so an EEG, right? And obviously, in this case, they're using sensors coupled to the brain, but we've looked at remote brain monitoring, which is very possible. It's been around since the 70s. And what it talks about is looking at a difference between the frequencies and that they want or that they're getting and the target frequencies that they're after. And what this thing literally talks about doing is being able to override someone's brainwaves with another person's brainwave to improve their work, whether it be mental work or not. Like it could be physical work too. Stimulation, brain user. That'll be a good one right here. So let's search for brain state database. Brain state database. A brain state database may be any component configured to store frequencies and associated brain states. For example, a brain state database may be in something like a Microsoft Access database or a Microsoft Excel database. Brain state databases may be a table associating a plurality of frequencies and corresponding brain states, target brain states in certain examples. For an example, a brain state database may have a cell, right? In a spreadsheet, you have a cell for post-traumatic stress disorder and an associated cell for target brain frequency for improving a user's post-traumatic stress disorder condition. As yet, in another example, a brain state database may have a cell for a target brain state of an expert and a corresponding frequency. The brain state database may include target frequencies based on research that indicate that a target brain state corresponds to a particular target frequency. What they're talking about is like taking an expert in golf, for example, and then putting that person's brain waves over top of a beginner golfer and improving the beginner golfer's ability to learn and their ability to perform, because they're literally putting someone else's brainwave signature on top of a novice golfer's brainwave signature to get them to improve their performance. Let's look for cognitive performance now. No, we're gonna have to stop. I'll work these up as time permits. Right now, with the time I have to research, I'm looking at antennas. And the reason I'm doing this is because when we understand that the devices that are around us are going to be able to do things like provide cognitive enhancement, I'm really gonna try to illustrate for you why this idea of getting a neural link is really like, that's 1970s technology. We don't need Neuralink. We don't need Neuralink. Anyway, that's all. I've gone over my time. So, ta-ta.